Awesome. All right. Well, thank you everybody for coming tonight. Thank you to all those who are over Zoom and those who have joined us here tonight. Really excited to dive into this workshop. So I'm just going to be going over a few things to help elevate your portfolio, to start thinking about storytelling, and to just help you grow as an artist in general. So those things that we're going to be talking about are storytelling, authentic observation, daily practice habits, and how to kind of incorporate all those things into your everyday routine. So the first thing is storytelling, right? So purposeful storytelling. That's probably the most important thing for a portfolio, right? Recruiters don't just want to see that you can draw really well. They want to see your voice, what you have to offer, your flavor, your personality into your drawings. So it's a very important place to start. So we're going to start with gesture drawings, my favorite thing. So now to talk about to talk about gesture drawing, we kind of need to define the difference between gesture drawing and figure drawing, right? And so let me see. We'll start with figure drawing. Basically, figure drawing is kind of an emphasis on more refined, often technical studies, right? The emphasis is on anatomy, on proportion, shading, technique, right? So we all do this in college. These are a few drawings that I did in college as well. There's really not a whole lot of storytelling in this, right? Let's see. So I'm just going to go through a few. These ones here are more recent and definitely lean more toward gesture drawings. They're more gestural than those ones before. They're much more realistic. But there's this emphasis on form, on structure, on the folds, and just really trying to get proportions correct, right? And I love doing these, but there's kind of this difference, right, between this more structural approach and gesture drawing. Right? Just kind of go through a few of these, right? And I'm trying to still give a little bit of an attitude to each, right? Through a little bit of an expression or, their body language. But the purpose of these, for the most part, is trying to study that structure, okay? I'm gonna go through more of these, trying to figure out structure of a violin. Here's folds. Again, just really trying to understand the human figure. It's really important to do these studies before you really dive into adding more storytelling elements to it. Okay, so that's figure drawing. That's figure drawing. And now we'll kind of dive into gesture drawing. So gesture drawing is more of an emphasis on the mood, the expression, the personality, right? And generally, there's kind of more of a simplified anatomy as well. There's a fluidity to it, a lot more so, I would say, than in figure drawing. That's the thing, though, with really good figure drawing, they're able to integrate more of those storytelling elements and more of the fluidity and the gesture. Let's see. Another one here, right? So I'm really trying to get storytelling details into these poses. It's not just about studying the form or the proportions. It's a lot more emphasis, a lot more of that priority is given to the story. Okay, and the poses can be broad or they can be subtle, right? So storytelling doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be very broad and overstated and exaggerated, though it's obviously a good practice to try to push your work as far as you can and then kind of reel it back. But that's kind of the priority here, right? So even in some drawings like this where it's from behind, you can still kind of convey that attitude through the posturing, right? Through the body language, kind of the way characters hold themselves. Okay, little storytelling elements or props sometimes can help. So this page actually, these next two, I believe, were all from the same model, and I'm just thinking of a story and altering the pose and adding props, adding costuming, anything that I can to really kind of compound that storytelling effect. Right. So even something as small as like a raised pinky or a slight tilt in the head, really small details like the shifting or the angling of, sorry, I just realized they can see me over Zoom, right? Okay, I've got this like sticker over my over my camera. Okay. What was I saying? The angling of like the toes or the hands, there's very small things that you want to be paying attention to, because those are the subtleties that you'll find in real life, right? In real life acting. Let me see. So now that we've gone over gesture drawing, we've gone over figure drawing, the goal is to kind of merge those two, right? There's always kind of a tension between technical drawing and this fluid story-driven gestures. I've at least found this in my practice, where the more I try to study the anatomy, it seems like the story kind of falls away, right? But the more that I focus on the story, my anatomy starts to suffer. And so there's that tension, right? So you don't want it to be stiff and lifeless, but you don't want it to lack that story. And so honestly, for me, my philosophy is just embrace the process of choosing one or the other, right? So for a time, I just focus on anatomy, right? So all these studies that I did up here, I'm really just giving myself permission to focus on the anatomy and not worry too much about storytelling, not put that pressure on myself to try to integrate the two, because I just feel overwhelmed, right? It can be very overwhelming to try to master everything at once, right? And then I'll switch back, right? I'll switch back over to gesture drawing, to storytelling, and really trying to focus on that and just kind of letting anatomy take a backseat for a little bit. And that way I'm able to kind of fortify one study or one discipline and then fortify the other, and then kind of let them both inform each other until they sort of build on each other. And it's a much more gentle approach than trying to, put that pressure on yourself to just master all at once. Okay. So that's kind of my thoughts on figure drawing versus gesture drawing, right? And there's obviously overlap. There's a lot of fluidity between the two. But for me, it's helpful to kind of categorize them in that way so that I can kind of master each thing and then hopefully over time merge them together. Okay. So all that being said, the goal then is to take the work that you do with gesture, anatomy, proportions, taking all this information and putting onto a character design, right? So, and the character can be anything, right? It can be a creature, it can be an inanimate object sometimes, an animal, right? And so the goal is to be able to take all of that knowledge and that skill that you learn from gesture drawing and put it into your character. In fact, I had a mentor when I was working at Sony, Joe Mosier, who would always say, approach character design like you were in a gesture drawing class. You want it to feel like this is a very lively character that has that fluidity, right? And instead of trying to design it in a static pose, think of it as a gesture, right? How would this person actually move? And what's the most engaging way to lead the audience's eye through your design? Okay, so these are some characters I've done. I'm new enough in the industry that most of my work is still locked behind an NDA. And so I have all this work that I'm not allowed to share. But that being said, whatever design you end up doing, whether it's a main character or a background character, you still want to be putting this thought into it, right? At different, varying degrees of depth, I would say. For a background character, there's not quite as much of a backstory, but for a main character, there's obviously a lot that goes into it. Okay. Sec. My dock always floats over to my Cintiq and it drives me nuts. Okay. So the things we learn from figure drawing and gesture drawing, right? So obviously anatomy and form, proportions, all of these things we can carry into our character design. Obviously, we're pushing and pulling things, right? There's the line of action we still want to be incorporating. The most important thing is storytelling. And the point of the storytelling here is to convey this character's mood, their personality, right? That's what's exciting about character design, is that we can relate to these characters. They feel very real and alive, even though they're not real, but they have these motives and these feelings that are very human and that we can relate to. And so if we can incorporate that into our design, it will be a lot more powerful. And so now we have pose, expressions, we have costuming and props, all these things that we can kind of dive into at a much deeper level than with gesture drawing, which is more of a quick study. So you're really trying to dive in deeper and add these layers. So there's actually in design, a lot of times it's in logo design, this concept, I believe it's called propositional density. And basically it's the amount of meaning that you're able to convey through an image based on the various elements within it. Basically the more elements you have that are relating or relaying meaning will make your image a lot more powerful, right? So for example, the Apple logo, right? So they've got the tree of knowledge, right? The apple biting the fruit of knowledge, health, and there's other things too. There's a lot of meaning that is conveyed through one single image. So the more meaning you can put into your design, the more powerful and the more effective it will be, right? Because it communicates on so many different levels that the audience will be able to kind of pick up on whether or not they consciously know about it, right? And that's like most of our work as designers, is trying to put that meaning in there, seen or unseen. There's actually a podcast I really love called 99% Invisible. And it's basically, the podcast is about that 99% of a design that we don't know about, right? So the 1% is what we see, it's what we're familiar with, our experience. And then there's all this history, all this backstory. And so I think of it in the same way with design. Right? There's 99% that probably our audience won't pick up on, or they at least won't be totally aware of. And then there's that 1%, which is what they see. So you're just trying to layer that meaning in. Okay, so let me move on here. Okay, so let's see. So this is a character I did for Vivo. Sadly got cut later, but it's kind of this uptight, sort of like this Girl Scout mom type character, right? She's a like soccer mom type character, very intense, like type A red aggressive personality. And so you can kind of see that in her uptight, like her upright position, her posturing, right? Her super intense eyes, her angled eyebrows, right? Everything I'm trying to convey, like this almost predator. And I thought it would be funny if she was wearing like this Hillary Clinton red power suit. Hillary Clinton would sometimes wear this like red suit. And so kind of that like commanding presence I thought would be another layer that I could add to this character. So again, this is more of a side background character. There's not as much nuance or depth, but still there's kind of elements you can add to it. Okay, so this is a design done by Joe Mosier. And I did the expression sheet here. But there are very specific references that he was using. I think that honestly is what distinguishes good designers and mediocre designers from excellent, great designers, is their research. So the more they bring into the character, the more authentic, the more effective that character is, in my opinion, right? So I really think that a designer is only as good as their research. So, but he had these really specific references that he was looking at from these Cuban men, these Cuban singers. There's like the Buena Vista Social Club, the singers. And so he's looking at those singers and kind of just their laid back quality. And so taking all that research he had done I tried to incorporate it into my expression sheet and tried to let it inform my work here. And so there's a very specific way, these warm, kind of older Cuban men would hold themselves, and I really tried to fuse that into my drawing. Right, I'm not just doing a cheap caricature. Right, caricature is the right word. It's just there's a difference between like street caricature, you know what I'm talking about, and then genuine caricature where you're zooming in, you're really trying to understand a character or a person. Right, there's a very unique quirks that they have. What was that? Authenticity. Yes. Yeah, so there's much more authenticity to it. It's not just kind of a shell of a person. And so that's what I am always striving for, is trying to find a genuine caricature of a person. There's like even a reference that he would pull up, like small things like the thickness of the wrist, right? So they'd have this thick wrist from the front, but it's thinner on the side, which obviously that's just anatomy, but he would kind of exaggerate that, and these very specific details, just they bring nuance to a character. So yeah, I'm bringing in, I'm letting this character inform the expression, right? So I don't just paste the expression onto a character, I put the character into the expression, right? So there's a fine distinction between those two ideas. And I'll actually, I'll put myself in the hot seat here just to show an example of a more generic expression sheet. There's nothing very specific about any of these expressions that might distinguish her from another character. And if we were to dive more into her backstory, there'd be a lot more to explore, a lot more to add, subtle nuances in the way they kind of contort their face. That being said, this is a tertiary character, not a very important one. Not a lot of screen time, if any dialogue at all. And so we mostly just needed something to give to the modeling team and the animation team, basically to know what her range is. So how far does she stretch? How far does she squash? And so it serves a purpose. So I'm not saying that this kind of thing isn't useful, but if your main character looks like this, you're in trouble. Okay, so there's got to be a lot more subtleties. Okay. Okay. So there's just some questions you'll want to ask yourself, right? So does it feel like this character has a story, right? Do they have believable depth to them, right? Again, appropriate for their importance in the story. Does it feel like somebody you actually know, right? And if not, right, you want to try to reference people from real life, whether they're somebody you know or from film, right? Film comps are used all the time in studio. In fact, it happens all the time. We'll put a film comp, an image of somebody very specific in a specific expression, and we'll kind of study that, right? Trying to reflect whatever there is in that person that we're trying to get into our design. It's a very useful practice. Okay. So speaking of practice, let's see. I'm just going to switch gears just slightly here. But related, right? So how do we get to this point with our designs? How do we incorporate all this stuff into our character designs? Okay, there are all these disparate elements that we're wanting to put together. And I just want to talk about the importance of a practice, so establishing a practice. And I try to think of this not so much in the verb sense of it, but more of the noun sense of it, right? So the same way you might think of like a law practice or a private therapy practice, right? So the verb to practice to me seems more like a one-time event, right? Where you sit down and you practice. Whereas the noun practice to me kind of conjures up this feeling of consistency and permanence, right? It's a practice. It's something that almost tangible, right? And so these are just a few definitions, right? So a repeated or customary action, the usual way of doing something. So for example, like local practices, something that kind of exists and persists throughout time. The form, manner, and order of conducting legal suits. So again, the law definition. Systematic practice for proficiency. I really like this one because that's what we're doing, right? So we're trying to get to a level of proficiency in our work. And it's not a bad way to think of yourself as like a business or something, a professional in your business. If you're trying to get into the professional sphere, you want to treat yourself like professional, right? By carefully developing these routines, off of which you can build structure and success. Okay, and this takes a lot of time, and there's no silver bullet. Everyone always wants to find that silver bullet, but there's not one. It's just a lot of time. And I'll show this here. And so today we have everything at our fingertips, right? So we can order something and it arrives sometimes the same day. And so it's hard in this age of speed and convenience and instant gratification to kind of slow down and consistently focus on honing our craft. But the truth is that you'll actually shoot yourself in the foot if you are trying to master something very quickly, right? So taking it slow is actually a really good thing. As you can see here in this graph, huge bursts of energy. We're all kind of prone to this, right? We get inspired and then we try to change everything at once, and we spiral because we're wanting to control everything all at once, instead of kind of, like I said before, systematically trying to master something by focusing on one thing at a time and then moving on to the next thing, right? So this just leads to burnout, and we'll never actually get to our goal. So consistency is the key to get to the goal the goal of mastery, right? And if you haven't already read Mastery by George Leonard, I highly recommend it. It's really good. It's all about the practice. It's all about the journey. It's really not about the end result. In fact, a lot of artists who have these showcases, they'll kind of falter afterward because they have nothing to look forward to. So they think, this is it, this is the end result, this is the goal, and I've made it, and why do I feel terrible? I don't have anything else to look forward to. So instead of thinking of some far off goal as, as the goal, you want to think of the goal as today. Today is the goal. Today's practice is the most important thing. Okay, so true control and mastery comes with a tremendous amount of practice over time, but slow and incremental. And that's the thing about growth, is it's incremental, it's imperceptible, and often it's not even linear, right? Sometimes you make progress and then you backslide, and so it's kind of all over the place. And so just kind of recognizing that and planning for it, right? So planning for times of plateau, planning for times of backsliding is really important for our mental health, to know, like, just because I'm not making consistent growth and progress does not mean that I'm failing. So yeah, there's a quote by, I think it's either Chuck Jones or Walt Stanchfield. So if anybody knows, let me know. But I think it's Chuck Jones. He says, everyone has 10,000 bad drawings in them. You just have to get them out as fast as you can. And I love that, like, just kind of expelling all these demons. Like, you just have to get out your terrible drawings and not be ashamed of them. Let's see. Trying to think. Okay. So, and there's actually this story in Art and Fear, which is another really great book that I recommend. I think they even had us read it. I read it in college, and so it should be like required reading for every design student. It's awesome. But there's a story about this pottery class. So I don't know how many people are familiar, but the class was split into two different groups. And the one group was given the task to do like 100 pots or something, a ton of pots. And then the other group was tasked with creating the perfect pot, right? So the ultimate standard of a pot. And so while the first group was, burning through all these different pots and learning and failing and experimenting, the other class was kind of pontificating, right, on what is the perfect pot, and in the end, the first group, as you guessed, they created the best pots because they were practicing and failing and learning. And then basically everybody from the other group created one bad pot, right? One lousy pot. And so it really is just about practicing and getting that mileage in, that pencil mileage. And so I kind of think back to earlier in my artistic journey, getting a drawing right was really more a matter of luck, right? Honestly, than knowledge and deliberate execution. And it might seem like a lot of work to kind of study every single day. It seems relentless. Studying specific things like shoulder systems and hands and feet are incredibly challenging. But the truth is that it's actually a lot harder to fumble around with those things in every single drawing and to wrestle with anatomy every single time than it is to just zero in on it, study it until you get it. And then you can, every time you draw hands, you now have this thing that you're good at, right? Or decent at, at least. And then I have this quote that I really love, and I think it's just a tweet. I'm not sure where this comes from. I save all these quotes and stuff, and I should probably make a note of where they come from. But again, if anybody knows, let me know. But yeah, strangely, life gets harder when you try to make it easy. Exercising might be hard, but never moving makes life harder. Uncomfortable conversations are hard, but avoiding every conflict is harder. Mastering your craft is hard, but having no skills is harder. Easy has a cost. So I actually took piano lessons for about 10 years when I was younger, and I had this really great teacher, and he would identify my weakest passages in my pieces, and then he would print it out and put it on a separate page with enough room underneath for notes for me to write, for him to write, and I would then focus only on that passage until it became the strongest part of my piece. And my teacher would kind of compare it to a fort, like a fortification, which are defensive walls built to protect an army, so that they have kind of upper hand during an attack, right? And so every time I approached the passage in my performance, instead of feeling really nervous and shaky, I could just kind of march right through it and feel very confident, right? So I think of that same thing in drawing. And so as you're drawing something, instead of avoiding the hands and getting all, muddled with certain things, it becomes your strength and you can kind of lead with it. So again, the more you understand about anatomy, the less you have to wrestle with it. And instead you can spend your mental energy on more important things like storytelling, and integrating acting into your design. And actually, I'm not much of a gamer. I like to play video games with my husband sometimes, but I kind of think of it like leveling up in a video game. Once you beat a certain level, you can kind of take all that experience and then also any items that you acquire in that level, and you take it with you to the next level, right? And even though that next level is harder, you are more prepared for it, and you have more skills, and you have more, things to help you. And so that you become more competent, right, and prepared for each level. So all this being said, I've really honestly not thought of myself as the most talented. I just feel like I'm relentless. And so that's my strength. And honestly, I think it's a much more accessible belief system than talent, right? Because amazing things can be achieved by just practicing. You can be super talented and have a terrible work ethic and it gets you nowhere, right? So, okay. I was going to do a little bit of a demo here. Does anybody have questions before I jump into it though?
Okay, I think it's on. Hopefully they hear me. So sometimes when you're gesture drawing, do you ever go out and do at a cafe? I feel like sometimes when you're doing that, Sam Nielsen is my teacher, and he'll be like, okay, this is close, but it looks like you're hamming up the story that they were doing. But then sometimes you'll do too little, and he's like, okay, but there's no story here. How do you feel like you authenticity is probably a good answer, but sometimes I feel like I just can't nail exactly what it's supposed to be doing. And he's like, oh, no, It's not good, man.
Not
and like
there.
last week was great, so I don't know how to give any advice on that.
You're talking about just overacting versus underacting?
I guess, like, yeah, you'll be going out to a cafe, and you're like, that person's a great story, and you try to draw it, and then like, yeah, it'll be like an overacting thing. You're like, oh man, I thought I like nailed that story, and then like, yeah, I guess getting the right in between, but
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's a complicated answer because there's a lot at play there, right? Some of it has to do with the story itself. There's a general like spirit to each story. Some are a lot more broad and a lot more exaggerated. You think about Bad Guys, like that's one that just comes to mind. Like the acting is just so, it's like up here, you know, and there's other ones that are a lot more subdued. So you want to keep that in mind, right? And then the character itself, right? Is this a type of character that would do that kind of acting, right? But yeah, part of it is a little bit of intuition. Other, you know, the rest of it is is a mystery. You know, I think there's a lot that goes into it for sure. But yeah, I don't know. Sam's a great teacher. So yeah, Sam was one of my professors from college here where we're hosting this event. But yeah, I'd say there's a lot of things at play there. But I think over time, as you observe more, right? So you're trying to put that character into something that fits them, right? And fits a story. And so some of it is taste as well, right? So Joe Mosher would always talk about this, like you have to have really good taste, which is hard to, like, how do you get good taste, right? Everybody has different tastes and it's kind of subjective. But there are general guidelines, I would say, and you can kind of feel it out, right? The more you watch movies, the more you observe, the more you kind of bring that into your general library of experience. So hopefully that answers your question. Yeah. Yeah. I'm not trying to dodge by any means, but yeah, just over time, just kind of gauging. Do you have a question? No? Okay. Okay, so let's see. We'll do, so the next one is observation, right? And so this is what we're talking about. How far do you push something before it breaks, right? And again, it's defining up front what the general mood is. So you could push this a number of ways. And maybe we can kind of do that. Let me choose a different brush here. Okay. So you can push this really far, right? Let me see if I can, putting myself on the spot to like try to. So here I'm already like getting into anatomy stuff and not focusing on the story, right? So this feels, you know, almost like Al Hirschfeld, like everything's very flowy and pushed. And so I'm thinking about the line of action. A lot of that has to do with how broad something is, right? So if something's very pushed like that versus, you know, a more subtle, curve, it's going to convey a different meaning. Okay. And now we're starting to like break anatomy and things. But yeah, something a lot more subtle. Some poses are just more exaggerated, right? There's some that I don't even have to push because it just already feels like it's an exaggerated caricature. Right? There's some people like that as well. If you go on, one of my favorite websites is earthswirl.com. And it's like those people, you don't even have to push anything. Let me try another. Okay, so let's see. This is maybe a good one. Oops. Okay, so let's say, and Sam always talks about this, you've got to name the pose, right? So right now I'm thinking she's peering over the edge. What's an adverb? I always struggle with adverbs, right? And he always talked about, what was that? Riverbank. Yeah, I'm thinking of an adverb, maybe like terrified, And he would talk about needing to expand your vocabulary, right? You can only incorporate as many concepts as you're aware of, right? So the more concepts and emotions and states of being that you're familiar with, the more you can put into your work. Okay. So I'm not worrying about anatomy. I have to remind myself because I love studying anatomy. It's like one of my favorite things. I have to actively not worry about it so much. Okay, so I'm really pushing this forward. All right, I'm going to do a really broad. Oh, man. I swear I know how to draw. Okay. Right, so she's maybe just saw somebody fall off the edge. Okay, so that's a lot more broad than, right, everything's very stretched. And the style of your film as well is going to kind of determine how far things squash and stretch. Something like Arcane is going to be a lot more anatomically based and grounded than Hotel Transylvania, right? Okay, I have to. Oops. Have to stretch this out a little bit. Okay. Okay. So I was really trying to show this exaggerated this tension, right? That pull there. She's leaning over the edge. That could be a lot more subtle. I'm actually curious what Sam would say, like his reasons for why it's too broad, or why it might be too understated, and it could just be the specifics, the proportions. Maybe if the proportions are very realistic and yet they're in this very broad pose, or maybe if they're, I don't know, because all of that is kind of integrated.
You'll look at something and be like, oh, immediately kind of like, that doesn't work with that character. Like, I don't know, I feel like he looks at a design and immediately thinks of like what he thought.
Right, yeah. So that design often comes with a set of rules for acting. And that will be a lot more cohesive, right? So if you've got this really realistic character but they're very exaggerated, or vice versa, it might feel a little bit incongruent. And so I'm just kind of again trying not to worry about anatomy. Yeah, Sam is so good at identifying very subtle details. I'm trying to think or she's kind of leaning her hand forward, like, are you okay? Try to think of it as if it was actually playing out before me. I changed my mind. It's all about experimentation. Anyway, so hopefully that kind of conveys it, right? Like, there's different levels of extremes that you can go with this. Okay, let's see. We'll do a few more. So with this one, a lot of times with your model, they'll be they won't have much of an expression, if any. And so you have to create that story. So like I said, with Sam Nielsen, he would always encourage you to come up with that story. So naming your pose with a noun and an, or not a noun, a verb and an adverb, right? So what are they doing and how are they doing it? What's their personality? What's their attitude? Let's see. So falling gracefully. I was kind of imagining like recoiling, like in disgust. But I do like that too, or like maybe I'll do both. Like, or waking up, in the morning, just, I don't know. I always wish I could wake up like just blissful. I don't know if you've seen Julie and Julia. Meryl, I think it's Meryl Streep and yeah. I love that part where she's like, I'm up. And she just like gets out of bed and like is so happy. I just love that part. Okay, so let's see. Recoiling with disgust. So yeah, angles are a really important way to convey a story, right? So whether she's going like this or like this, it tells a very different story. So imagine with recoiling, you're kind of like arching back, like, and so it seems more appropriate. Right? I'm trying to decide if her arms should be straight or, and it's helpful to actually act it out as well. So silly, but it's helpful. I know. Yeah. Let's see. Maybe she even like has her arm like. Trying to think. Getting the eyeball just right. Mouth wouldn't be quite that open. Yeah, more like that. Like, ugh. Dude, that is my life right now. We have the worst spider infestation.
There was a spider on the outside my car today.
Oh. Another thing to be keeping in mind is balance, right? Does your character feel like there's weight and balance and realistic and believable weight distribution, right? And so it's got to feel like that arm is supporting her body. So I felt like down here it wasn't quite supporting it. So I'm trying to. So since she's leaning so far back, she's going to need the other leg to counterbalance. So some of this is kind of logical, right? A lot of drawing, at least for me, is intuitive, but there's still that knowledge and that experience in real life that you have to be integrating in it as well. I like wonder if she should like have her foot splayed out. Like, like your toes, like
force yourself to think, like intuitively, yeah, you're doing this, you're drawing, like, oh, I'm just drawing, but then like you have to force yourself to think of, oh, the second thing you said, it was more, you said knowledge. You said incorporating the stuff that like you wouldn't usually do.
Like life experience.
Yeah, like what when you're drawing, like sometimes I feel like it's hard to force myself to remember that stuff.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, practice. I mean, over time, like things just start to either feel right or wrong. And so based on your experience that you have, really observing things, right? So the more you try to actually focus on keying into these things, the more you'll realize like that feels wrong. But there are things, honestly, too, that are technically right that feel wrong. And so even though it's right in real life, it might not feel right. And so that's where you kind of have to take some artistic liberties as well, to make sure that it at least feels right. Same with perspective too. I took a class on perspective because I'm miserable at it and I'm trying to get better. But that was the whole thing, is like, learn all these things, but at the end of the day, you want to just try to feel it out. And that will feel more accurate than like a super duper accurate drawing, or at least will feel more, lively. Like there's energy and movement to your drawing rather than kind of a stiff, sterile, lifeless drawing. Okay. I'm thinking that maybe this arm, like she doesn't have enough support to be doing what she's doing. I might change my mind again. Okay. Getting a call from my sister. Okay. At this point, I'm just kind of noodling. But the thing is, if it feels too relaxed, it doesn't convey that recoiling feeling, right? So maybe I will put the hand up there after all. Even be like going like this, kind of. Sometimes you fail. Is it good to see somebody fail? Sometimes it's helpful. Like, oh, they're human.
Yeah.
That's not quite right. Okay, I can't figure out this other leg. Any suggestions from the audience? Kicking it away. Yeah.
Having the heel out almost, like you're really stretching it out to kind of kick that away, and you're mostly your belly.
Yeah. What is that? I'm thinking of a sequence. From Tarzan, where she's like, get up, and then she like smacks him, and then like, Eight 20. Okay. Should we wrap up soon? Okay. So maybe that. So even this little toe here, right, can convey meaning. Is that propositional density thing again? So even the smallest little details can communicate something. So if it doesn't communicate something, either change it or get rid of it. Okay. Let's see. Do you have time for any more? Or should we kind of wrap it up? One more? Okay.
Since we're kind of talking about using all of this to put together a strong portfolio, and as we learn, there's so many moving things into your work. What is your suggestion to put together a strong portfolio that kind of show all of your skills, but not in a way that's all over the place? Like there's got to be some theme or some organization, right? Instead of saying like, look what I can do, and then just all over the place. If there's any hierarchy of the things you want to show in your portfolio, what would the top 3 be?
I think you can still showcase like, look, I know how to draw. I know how to draw, right? I know how anatomy. I'm good at observing. And so including a section for gesture drawing, I think is fine. But in terms of like showing everything, right? I see portfolios sometimes that literally are all over the map, where it's like, I can animate, and I can do storyboarding, and I can do digital painting, and I can do special effects and props. And it's like, it doesn't serve you well to do that. I guess it depends though. So smaller studios, you wear a lot of hats. I haven't worked at a small studio, and so I don't know exactly what they look for, so I can't speak to that as much. But at a bigger studio, occasionally I'll do something with a little bit of background, or occasionally I'll do a prop, or something that's maybe closer to like a storyboard type sequence. But mainly I'm doing characters. And so if you want to do character design, show them that you can do character design. Also spend your time on character design, right? If you're spending your time on all these things, you're not spending your time going deeper. So I would say focus on putting together a portfolio that showcases your most successful pieces, where you're able to integrate all those things, right? So if you feel like some are a little bit weaker in some areas, I'm not telling storytelling as well, or maybe the proportions aren't as pushed, or the anatomy's not as good, try to showcase only the pieces that have those, all of those things integrated as best you can, right? And so not getting too precious with your drawings just because it shows what you can do, right? So if you have a really beautiful plein air painting, but you're not interested in doing that, then don't include it, right? You can put it on Facebook or on Instagram, right? Like I love painting as well. And I've been learning and trying to improve my painting skills, but I don't include it in my portfolio because it's not what I want to do full time, at least, right? Like it's not my passion. And so there are different schools of thought on that. Some people think it's better to be versatile and to show that you can do different things so that you're hireable. But I would say you could even create a separate portfolio. Some people will do that, and they'll only provide the specific portfolio to certain studios, right? So if you're applying to smaller studios, maybe you include more of a diverse portfolio. If you're going for a big company, then you kind of have to put it all in, right? That's at least my philosophy. Just go all in, and that's kind of what I did. Is I just went all in on gesture drawing and character design and learning that. So that's my very long answer. Hopefully that answered your question. Yeah. Okay. Are there any other questions? Okay. All right. Well, thank you everybody for attending. This is really fun. workshop here. And so hopefully you're able to use some of this knowledge, some of this information to guide your portfolio as you curate it and choose the pieces that show the most story and the most soul and life. And that's the ultimate goal, is just trying to convey life in your portfolio.